And folks, welcome to our research series. Ilya, I'm very much looking forward. I was very intrigued when we did the sort of round the table introduction a couple of weeks ago. I was very intrigued by your work. I'm looking forward to learning more. And I do promise you all, I just went to the doctor. It's not contagious. I swear. He said it's not contagious. So if you hear me coughing, don't worry. But looking forward to learning more about measuring, your title, Measuring the Agenda in the Russian News Media, Censorship, Bias, and Propaganda Detective. So this is really important. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And it's a great pleasure and honor for me to tell about these things here, because I feel that Ostro Workshop is a very inspiring place in many respects. Well, I will start from setting some kind of context to my talk, and because this part of my talk is more important to Ostro Workshop people than the technical second part. This introduction will take some time. What you see here is the front page of Russian language search engine Yandex, and you might know that only 3 countries in the world have their own search engines. China with Baidu, Russia with Yandex, and of course, United States with Yandex was founded in 1997 by 2 talented computer scientists, Ilya Utekhin and Arkady Volozh. And recent news from last week is that the deal was closed concerning splitting the national search engine and selling to new owners, allowing Arkady Volozh to remain controlling cloud computing and autonomous vehicles business abroad, and all the rest of the Yandex business, which is a huge conglomerate of various services, remains in Russia under the state control. And this is a part of a long story of the government that tries to control the cyberspace and the free flow of information. Concerning the question where the Russians get the news, I always was interested in how people consume news. Where do they get them? The most recent data that we have from this year is that television has daily reach of 64% in the population older than 12. But at the same time, Yandex is much more than any of the most popular TV channels taken separately. WhatsApp is used for communication, but also to get news, because there are some places in WhatsApp where people can use. Telegram is an important thing, is a messenger that is very important for the younger generation. You can see 75% of young Russians use Telegram daily, and 80% of them use Telegram to read news in Telegram channels. So if you have a media like news media in Russia, you're very likely to have a Telegram channel that is one of the most important channels of distributing content. So interestingly, PK is a state-controlled Russian analog of Facebook. And YouTube became the main platform for the distribution of opposition views in news and everything, because Russian authorities have no analogous services. They would like to close YouTube, but they cannot do it for that reason. So you see that in order to get all this under control, we we will take a look at how Russian government developed the control over the cyberspace. But what we have here, and this is the view of the front page of Yandex with the search, you input your search query here. What it looked before October 2022, when the news and the search page was sold to VK. Why? Because here we have a news aggregator. So any attempt to search anything in Russian started with the news. And Russians prefer to search on Yandex because up to now, in some areas, the indexation of Russian internet is better in Yandex than in Google. So this was the most important resource for news distribution. And that was noticed by Russian government, London Gulf. So Yandex News was influenced by presidential administration, starting from Moscow protest political rallies, mass events of dozens of thousands of people on the street. Later in 2014, when Crimea was annexed and Russian supported, state-supported separatist movement on Donbass was developing. And at the same time, at mayor elections in Moscow, Alexei Navalny, the main opposition figure and currently political prisoner, he got 27% of the votes. And all that was supported by independent media, which published their news here. So in this place now in 22, you could see only more or less state-controlled sources. But in 2014, you could see even Radio Liberty here, funded by American taxpayers. So that was a situation that could not be tolerated by presidential administration. So they made Yandex to comply with the rules. And the rules suppose that only a limited number of sources could publish news in that news aggregator. To get an idea about Russian media landscape, we should imagine that there are some media that are directly controlled by the government. At the same time, there are other on the opposite, like side of the spectrum, which are independent, and currently many of them are based abroad, and some of them are just funded by like Deutsche Welle, BBC, Radio Liberty, Voice of America, and so on. Those which have been declared recently foreign agents. So they are foreign agents, and very soon they will be labeled as so-called undesirable organization. That means that any kind of cooperation with them would involve accusation and probably be regarded as criminal offense. So between them, you can see a lot of privately owned news outlets that to this or that extent are influenced because they are owned by oligarchs, and the oligarchs get their money from the state, basically. And that is why they pursue their own agendas, business agendas, and lobbyist agendas. But basically, they support the government policies. And what any aggregator does, it collects texts of the news from different sources And you can see here a cluster. So when the news about the same event taken from different news outlets are put together. And they belong to different media. So the bigger is the cluster, the more trendy the news. So it will appear on top in the results of news aggregator. But each news aggregator should take a decision. What titles from what news sources will appear there? So Yandex, starting from 2016, had a list of sources allowed for publication on the front page. And, if you are to become a ruler, authoritarian ruler in some country, it would be great for you to learn the lesson of Russian experience of strengthening control over information flow, because it's just an exemplary story. After those events, mass protest rallies in Moscow, the very intense process of consolidation of control started in 2011, when for the first time State Security Service required VK social networks to block opposition groups. And then there was Safe Internet League. It's an NGO, formally it's an NGO, but it's state-controlled NGO, was created to help the official watchdog Roskomnadzor. Ros is Russia, communication, Nadzor is surveillance. So it's a powerful administrative body that can just switch off anything, and happily is less technically competent than the collective intelligence of internet users across the globe. That's why they didn't achieve to block Telegram, which is using a protocol that has a proxy inside, so they cannot do anything with them, even with deep analysis of packages. So starting from 2012, different laws were adopted, like law on foreign agent NGOs, and then it was extended to include media as foreign agents and physical persons as foreign agents. So each Friday, we get published a new list of foreign agents, physical foreign agents, but also NGO and media. Law on the protection of children from noxious information. You can imagine that children and noxious information can be interpreted in different ways. And immediate blocking of internet resources calling for an arrest means that no court decision is needed to block things. When Crimea was annexed, several things happened that are important for this story. Law on bloggers, that bloggers starting from some size of audience should be registered as a media. And an important thing is a law on localization of personal data that basically obliged big IT corporations to keep personal data of Russian users on servers located physically in Russia. And that means that they have some property, and this property can be confiscated or be a part of negotiations. And in 2014, offshore journalism started because Russian media in exile appear And with the start of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, this offshore journalism flourished as one of the few possible solutions. 2015, the first cases appeared of repressions against people for posting in social networks. And yesterday's news was that a sociologist, famous sociologist from Moscow, Boriska Garlitsky, was sentenced to 5 years of prison for a post against the war published in his social network page. Interestingly, law on news aggregators. So news aggregators should be registered as media and were considered responsible for fact-checking. It is difficult to understand how they would like to control it. But actually in the law, it is stated that if you publish something from officially registered media, you should not fact check after them. So it was made to avoid publishing of things from non-official sources. It would be very interesting to discuss technical details that I just avoid discussing them because of the lack of time. But the Yarovaya law, Yarovaya is the name of the person who proposed it in Russian parliament, is a package of anti-terrorist legislation that, among other things, obliges telecom providers to store the content of voice calls, data, images, everything for 6 months. And the metadata, location, time, who were recipients of the message for 3 years. You can imagine what kind of infrastructure should be built to comply with this law. And obviously, it makes possible for many people to earn huge amounts of money because these are internet users and mobile phone users who pay for that. And you see that these restrictive laws have very interesting incentives to be adopted because there are many people who are business-like interested in the adoption of such law. Law on media is foreign agents, laws on VPN, that VPN services should be officially registered and comply with the lists of prohibited resources, law on search engines, results block, law on disrespect of authorities, and law on fake information. So, and in 2019, first mobile internet shutdowns were registered in situations of protest rallies. So you see, I would not continue up to now, but you can see that in Russia, free flow of information in cyberspace is considered as a threat of national security. And it is perceived, information flow is perceived as something that can destabilize Russia from outside, from the Western world, and from inside, because there are agents of Western world inside. So there is a legal infrastructure of censorship that has been built. So what I did, starting from 2018, was to build in the form of a bot in Telegram of an alternative news aggregator that was showing 2 different agendas. One, you can see here the icon of a TV set, and TV set is what Kremlin says. And megaphone is what independent media say. It was interesting that, well, I knew beforehand which media belong to which group. But it was illustrative of the way how different media belonging to different parts of this media landscape treat same events, and what events are promoted and what events are disregarded. And because any news aggregator behind, like under the hood, comprises a huge database which is annotated with all the persons, organizations, and so on, because you could like press a button who and get the newsmakers that were trendy that day, and then press the name of each of the newsmaker to get the list of recent publications.
Just a clarification question. So with the two aggregation systems, you said that you knew the platforms that would be associated with the two groups. And so is that the logic of your aggregators? You were putting all the ones in one camp in the bottom? That's how they get it?
Yes. I know beforehand that Radio Liberty, Kommersant, Moskva, and Rosneft, they are relatively redundant. And so I group the news agenda from the independent media separately from state control.
Okay. Thank you.
And I noticed something interesting in how the can we do something to just for people to see that part of the
Just minimize
minimize it. Thank you.
Good.
Yes, sorry.
So I noticed that very interesting data concerns how people are mentioned in the news, because when the ratings are published by the analytic organizations, they usually take the absolute numbers of newsmakers mentioned, and they disregard the, like, for example, there are media that cover sports events, and it's not strange that the sportsmen are mentioned there and some other newsmakers from pop music are not. But usually the ratings disregard this difference. For me, it was interesting from my data, these are from 2019, to see that there were some newsmakers like Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, Vladimir Zelensky, who were mentioned across all the media landscape more or less equally. And there were some others, like main opposition figure Alexei Navalny, who are very actively mentioned in some news sources, but almost disregarded in some others. And that's interesting. You might have heard that Vladimir Putin never ever mentions the name of Navalny. And this is an interesting position because there are other systems of state propaganda that deal with their main opposition figures. For example, in Hungary, George Soros, who's the main enemy of the society, according to Orban, is accused of all the sins in every bus stop. On subway walls, you can see anti-Soros propaganda saying Soros has a plan to destroy our society, and you will be concerned. So it's just a different approach. Here, we just silence it. And I thought that we can measure the agenda in terms of mentioning some persons. And we can, from all the newsmakers mentioned, we can single out some who are top newsmakers, but they are most unevenly mentioned across the whole set of sources. And it is interesting to think whether silencing in some cases is a question of bias, and in some others is a question of censorship. I omit now all the caveats because what we do is to select, we make topic modeling, and we select news on international policy, internal policy, society, economy, and culture. We don't take like gossip, accidents, sports, pop music, and other categories. We only like limit ourselves with general news in as for Navalny, for example, we can.
Can you just go back and explain what that last figure meant?
Oh, that means there are different here, the names of news sources, and we can see that 0.25%, that is out of like 0.25% of publications had the name of Alexei Kudrin, former finance minister and vice prime minister of Russia, mentioned in the title of the publication. And it is logical that Vedomosti is like Wall Street Journal, more or less, because financed and things. Business FM also, and Ros Business Consulting is also business publication, so they have, and Kommersant, they have more mentioning. But some others, because Kudrin is a kind of a position inside of Russian elite. So he is one of the most illustrative persons. He is mentioned, but the patterns of mention can be used to discuss silencing and promoting. So we can even group the media according to what they do with main opposition figure. Some of them obviously promote him, some state control, by the way, most part of them are state control, downgrade them, and please.
Thank you so much for this. Very interesting. Navalny, could you talk a little, you constantly refer to him as Russia's main opposition candidate, but the legitimacy is Navalny himself isn't that popular in Russia. I mean, his popularity ratings are low. And so when media reference here, I mean,
Can we hold these questions? Let's hold these till the end, and we're like clarification, like with the diagrams, cool. But I apologize.
Sure.
I should have framed it better in the beginning. But yeah, we'll come back to it. Like,
Okay, yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. It could be someone else, but Navalny is very illustrative, and we even call it Navalny Index because of all this news media stories having to do with poisoning of Navalny, like investigation concerning poisoning and things like that, his return and imprisonment. All this story was systematically silenced by a group of media. That's why I thought it was possible to use it to show censorship. Actually, we can measure the distance between media in terms of agenda that we measure in terms of mentioning personalities and news titles. So we have a big table showing how each of the list of asymmetrically represented persons and newsmakers is mentioned in this media, and for each media, for each person. And we can see here that the darkest blue is like a difference between Breitbart and NPR News in terms of mentioning persons. So we can compare them. And it is difficult to understand this form, but we can, these multi-dimensional things, to scale them onto a surface and get like a plane where we have more or less a group of state-controlled media, a group of independent media. Some of them are very different because these ones are business media and Medusa is not business media. And some middle zone. So we can even project it on a line, straight line, and get something like we have here. But here you have experts' opinion that can show us multidimensional structuring of media bias. But here, what we have is from data. It's a first attempt to do it based strictly on data, not on expert opinions. And what I'm doing now is trying to use this logic of analysis and advanced it a little bit on the data of Russian Independent Media Archive. Is an initiative that is promoted by the Bard College jointly with PEN America that tries to store the archive of the independent media starting from the beginning of this century. And this database already has most part of what independent media have published because an archive starts being interesting to the users when you can conveniently, from the point of view of usability, to take some data out of it. I'm preparing an analytic interface for this archive to show how the censorship or state control was spreading. And this is a draft design for this analytic interface. The darker red, the more pro-Kremlin is agenda. And we can see it across years when, for example, like Lenta was independent up to Crimea, when the chief editor and all the editorial staff changed, and so Lenta became pro-Kremlin. So behind these things, which are here purely illustrative, it's not based on data, it's just my draft. But there are interesting stories here, and that would make the archive more useful to people. And well, you see that there are some services like allsides.com that show how same event is commented from different news sources with right, central, or left orientation. And by the way, this particular example is interesting because even the right commentators say that Russian President Vladimir Putin is obsessed with history, and they don't say that this obsession is absolutely, is not based on the knowledge of history. he has very particular ideas of history. But still, here, what we see here is the result of editorial work by a human. I don't think we have artificial intelligence, ChatGPT and so on, developed up to the point that we can algorithmically create things like that. But my purpose is to develop a system that would show the bias. And there are two main lines which I'm about to develop for REEI. So the first line is mentions of persons and newsmakers. But when there is a mention of a newsmaker in the news, that is basically an indicator of the mention of an event, because the news reports event. And we can show how events are promoted or silenced. And we can select from the news and chaining different news texts in a story, how the event develops, and compare how the events are represented in different media sources. But the next step would be, it would require much work indeed, because what we have in news, and basically the events that happen in the world, are not they can be described in terms of types of events. The variety of the events is not limitless. So we, as for accidents, for example, we have some types of accidents. And each accident can be described in terms who did what are the actors, what are the circumstances, what are the actants. So when someone is launching a missile against some target, we know that the elements of this situation is not only who and what target was, but also civilian casualties, the target, and the results of the missile launch. So my idea is that the bias can be reflected in what elements of this situation are selectively covered in this or that news story. Because civilian casualties can be promoted by some media outlets, but silenced by some others. This kind of analysis would require to build kind of ontology or a system, descriptive system for each type of the news. And even more complicated is the task of linking the news and using this ontology to analyze the news flow.
And real, I want to interrupt. I know we need to save time for questions.
That's the last
Okay.
last sentence I say. And the other line of development of this analytic thing is to use collider to compare different news texts about the same events and to show the key phrases that contain value judgments. For example, same law discussed in Russia was called as stable internet law, through-net isolation law, and sovereign internet law. So you can see the difference. My idea was that we could probably build a system that would represent a news story in terms of a set of such key phrases comparing how different media represent the events. Sorry for being so long. I stop here and.
I just know there's some good questions out here, so no, thank you very much. So I interrupted you earlier, so I'd like to come back. I know you kind of answered your question, but.
Yeah, thank you so much for your research and for sort of addressing my question. I guess the framing of Navalny as being, this the main the main opposition figure when he polls at like 14% popularity or something, 14 or 15% popularity. I don't know. I think like there's a question to be made, like, and I'm not arguing one way or another about media censorship or not, but in terms of absolute relevance for the Russian public, for a candidate polling so low, so consistently, like, I don't know, is like it's
Well, what's important here, I agree with what you say, but the data that are published by Russian official polling agencies concern the whole of the population, and the knowledge about Navalny is much bigger than like support, which is about 14%. But if you take the data about big cities with population more than 1 million or even more than 100,000, and if we take the population which is younger and more educated, you will get totally different figures. And the problem is that we have no other position figure that would be known by public, because it's a systematic policy of Putin to destroy any real opposition, to have only like decorative opposition figures on the surface. So that's why Navalny is systematically silenced, and for purposes of censorship measurement, it is a great case, because it is very widely commented in independent media. But the fact that he is in prison and is not a newsmaker anymore is just ignored in that part of state-controlled media. So that's why he's very convenient for analysis.
Mike.
Yeah, I find your idea of events, sort of focusing on events rather than the mentions of individual actors is, I think, a sort of a departure and sort of a different kind of research project in this. And I just wanted to share with you something that reminded me of my early days as a junior faculty member several decades ago. We had something called events data that was used in the study of international crises, arms races, wars, and things like that. And an event was sort of an interaction between two state actors. Okay, the event could be declared war, signed a peace treaty, had negotiations, broke off negotiations, things like that. So there was sort of a set of events, a set of actions that would be defined as relevant events. So we weren't really looking at economic agreement. Well, actually, some of the times they'd be economic agreements, but we weren't looking at any domestic sort of interactions or anything. But in other words, there was a confined universe of actions that define the set of events that we would sort of look at. And I think we could do that at the international relations sort of level, because there are certain things that are seen as interactions between one government and another. It was more difficult when they tried to later extend that to studying civil wars. And because they're the categories of events, riots, protests, things like that, were a little slipperier and slip more into domestic kinds of things, of legitimate police actions to sort of brush the And again, this was years ago. We got to the point where some of the people, I didn't actually work on developing events data, but I would use it in some of my analyses. And they had computerized sources that back then even that could code events. And so they would get a list. Somebody makes a list of military operations or international crises, and then you could get a machine to use that in a very early form of artificial intelligence to sort of code this into a cooperative versus a conflictual.
Hmm.
So there was a single measure of conflict to cooperation. That was where the aggregators or what you call the news collide here, sort of aggregating it into this event was cooperative. This one was more cooperative than that one. This one was conflictual or more conflictual, going to war, threatening war, talking about agreements, signing agreements. So there was all this sort of series. So it seems to me that you're going to have to come up with some kind of structure for what kinds of events are going to count in your analysis. Do you have any ideas on how you're going to go about doing that and what? I mean, you could start with the way in which a name is used. I mean, it's not just enough to say Putin was mentioned or Melania was mentioned, but it was, Putin was doing this terrible sort of thing, or Putin, is very much serving the Russian sort of people and the people interest. So you have to build in a little more of a valuation in your coding system. So it's not just an event, but it's an event with some valence, cooperative, conflictual, good, bad, and those kinds of things. And so how are you going to sort of introduce that structure?
Thank you so much for your most interesting remarks. And this is a long and very interesting story. And I know that the last big grant from American military was in 2003, and that was the last project supported, and it was unsuccessful concerning the automatic building of an ontology. It was supposed that it was possible to build an ontology extracting data from texts, and it was not successful. And I know the reasons, so it's a very difficult thing. Even what you mentioned about those international relations, obviously the internal structure of the event can be as complicated as to include another event inside. So if we have negotiations, about something, about a war, for example. So war is inside as a story. How to treat it? So it becomes immediately when we approach this problem, it becomes more and more complicated. But what I hope it, I think that we can use data-driven approach and use human intelligence as part of mechanical Turk things for annotation of news flow. And when we have like news belonging to the same cluster, which are about same thing, we can pass through them, annotating same things referred in different ways, and make a kind of a database, and then go to the next level of abstraction. So we could be strictly empirical and data-driven in this approach. And I'm about to start experimenting. Unfortunately, large language models don't work with this very well. So they cannot build this kind of abstractions. And I don't know if they ever will, because, well, at some point they will, but not immediately. Because this kind of task is the most difficult one for ChatGPT. So I think that we will crowdsource human intelligence.
Can I just add? I think a lot of in the news, what is used, what like Russian language uses in the media is like satire and a choice of words, as you mentioned, right? And those are specifically things that are really hard to measure for all those LLMs because it's really hard to create embedding for such things. It's more like intention behind the text. Well, with all the embeddings, we're using text, but not the intention, if that makes sense. So I actually like your idea using human intelligence and labeling everything. And maybe after that, kind of like constructing the theory behind how to like cluster all of those codes, I guess.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. But you know, when you start such an adventure, everyone says you're crazy. Huge IT corporations are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on such things, and they don't achieve consistent results. And you are willing with your student code, like in a garage, to do something. But it's interesting. Sometimes it works.
So I have a question. I mean, and please forgive my ignorance when it comes to Russian media. So you're looking at all these different search engines and or beyond those to these news media outlets, but these are just Russian companies, correct? Okay, and then I'm curious if you took it like one step beyond Russian borders where they might not have as much control over the media. Like, but countries that are still culturally very tuned into Russia and very much care about what's happening in Russia. I wonder how the results would change if you like analyze the media mentions and the countries that are like satellites around Russia. I don't know. Is the Kremlin's influence still so profound that it would spill over into the former Soviet states, or?
You know, it's thank you for the question. Basically, what we do, we take into account news published by those offshore journalism outlets that are not located in Russia, not controlled by the government.
Okay.
They are based in Riga, in Prague, in Germany, someone else, and they have Western money. So they are independent in this respect. They are not
Or influenced by Western
yeah,
governments.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And as for other post-Soviet countries and the extension of this, actually using these tools for example, American situation, because we see polarization of media in the States, which is not less pronounced than in Russia. And all these filter bubbles which work and enhance this polarization process, that makes the task of showing bias and making data from other bubbles available to the participants of another bubble, making this task relevant. So we actually can think of developing a kind of instrument to make what is done by hand in those allsides.com, for example, to make it algorithmically and to show this American mediascape based on data and not on experts' opinions. And on the other hand, I mentioned Russian International Media, and this initiative is more important than for Russia only, because they have an initiative for several Latin American independent media. For Guatemala, they're doing it right now, and probably for Afghanistan, then for Hungary. Happily, the situation in Poland has changed a bit recently, but Polish independent media were threatened by the policies of the previous Polish government. So in many countries across the globe, not only post-Soviet, but post-Soviet included, the idea of protecting independent media and analyzing and showing business, showing bias and acting as counter-propaganda is relevant. That's why I think what we are doing is more important than just internal Russians thing.
Slava, last question.
So two comments. So one, I was thinking it, what if you apply some of these methodologies, but to something in the past? So where you can check the events. So archives have been open. So now we know what was happening. Let's say that you apply this to whatever. I understand that the media industry changed a lot and some stuff, it's not the same. But what if you take newspapers from whatever 40 years ago or 30 years ago, you apply more or less the same methodology, but now, you have clear historical record. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's much better compared to establishing events right now, no? So for example, negotiations after the fall of the Soviet Union, maybe now we have a lot of archives that have been open at that moment. Of course, that was not the case, no? So that's my first idea. The second one, my feeling is about the media industry that one big problem are sources, no? So essentially, they are not good sources anymore for almost anybody. So essentially, I don't know what they are reporting. I think they are. So part of the problem of media is that they are taking very biased layers as their sources, and they're not questioning the sources. So so essentially, again, so there is kind of a, if you think carefully about that, like deep crisis of journalism, if you want, okay, associated with, well, again, really going and checking the sources is becoming, it's and then we have many instances in which, yes, they were truthfully reporting, which government sources or other sources with very clear incentive to lie, they were just revealing, no? So again, maybe thinking about that, is there something about that? One idea on that direction is like people that report the facts may be better. Like people say, okay, I'm not interpreting the fact, but I start saying it happens this, it happened in this location at this time. So more objective descriptions of facts. Sometimes it's almost impossible to find those things in nowadays news, no? Like people jump directly to interpretations. Put more weight in these algorithms too. People just stay in the facts. It's much more difficult to lie about very clear objective facts. It's much easier to find convoluted interpretations to favor your interpretation, no?
Oh, thank you. I will comment on both of your questions, or both of your ideas. Well, now what we are doing is not working with actual news flow anymore, but we are trying to make this analytic machinery on archival data precisely, this Russian Independent Media Archive. But I would say that this kind of analysis works for recent decades, but not much earlier, because this striking polarization of media started in like 1970s and became very acute in the States, first during Reagan's term, and the journalism starting from that when well, good journalism suppose that different opinions should be represented. And when there is no rule like that, you can promote a biased opinion. And that when social networks appeared, that created a huge polarization as a result of those filter chambers, echo chambers. And that's why I mean that we are working with archival data, but my hope is that at some point same machinery could be applied to one of the alternative aggregators that are developed now by the old Yandex team led by Lev Gershenzon. It's called The True Story. We will join our efforts and we'll help them analyzing things. And the second idea about the facts, well, it's very difficult to determine what fact is, because when different people see the same event and they are witnesses, they see different things and they describe it differently. Even if they are not journalists, they put it in their social networks. And that's why at some point while I was looking for a business model to support this news aggregator, because it is difficult to sell it to anyone. We were aggregating grassroots level news from public pages and social networks, from anonymous Telegram channels. In some provinces of Russia, there are no independent reporting of news even from the neighborhood, because everything is controlled. For example, in Chechnya, in Dagestan, and Stavropolsky Krai, Rostov-na-Donu, in some southern, in Russian South, there are anonymous Telegram channels, but not groups in VK. So we collected this data, and actually the journalists of independent, not state media, but journalists from independent media were very interested in connecting to this kind of people's generated news, because they reveal the things that are usually disregarded from from the capital cities.
Well, folks, we should wrap it up. We're a little over there now. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Stick around and keep talking. There's still sugar to be consumed. People like cookies for lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya.
A lot.